I am so excited because today is a very special day. I look forward to this day every single year. Do you know what it is? That's right! It's the day I start planning for my family's annual road trip. Everyone knows that if you want your road trip to be a complete success, you've got to have a plan. And that plan starts as soon as you've answered one very important question. Where are you going? What's the goal? What's the destination? Where do you hope to be at the end of your trip? And this year, my family and I have chosen to go from here, Beaufort, South Carolina, all the way to Port Orford, Oregon, home of the Port Orford meteorite. That's right! We're going from coast to coast this year, which leads me to my second very important question when planning a road trip. How are you going to get there? What's the method of transportation? What's the route? What places will you visit along the way? We'll be taking a combination of backroads, interstates in our 7-passenger minivan, stopping in, among other places, Nashville, Tennessee, Kansas City, Missouri, Denver, Colorado, Utah, Idaho, ending in Port Orford, Oregon. Every rest stop will be meticulously timed out so that we can have the maximum amount of fun when we reach our ultimate goal. So that's the plan for our road trip, but it's not the only plan we're talking about today. And planning for this trip isn't the only thing that makes today so special. You'll see what I'm talking about in today's story. Looks like a good plan to me. Wait. I guess we'll go for a swim?
The Bible isn't just a book of random stories. It's 66 different books that come together to tell one story. An incredible one. About God's love for us. And now for an amazing story. Inspired by, well, the entire Bible.
In the beginning, God made a magnificent paradise, and everything in it was good. He made land and water, plants and trees, birds and animals, and then God got into the mud and made a man named Adam, and later a woman named Eve. They were the first two people on earth made in God's image, living in a place more beautiful than you could ever imagine. But then, they made a terrible choice. God had given them one rule.
You must not eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you do, you will die.
But the temptation proved irresistible to Adam and Eve. They just couldn't wait. So what was once a paradise became a broken world. People began to tell lies.
It was the woman you put here with me. She made me eat it.
Brother fought with brother.
No!
Selfishness spread through generations. Where there had been peace in the garden, there was now pain and death and sin that kept people separated from their Creator. But God had already planned a way for people to return to Him. Hundreds of years after Adam and Eve had broken His rule, God chose a man named Abraham. And God said,
Look up at the stars and count them if you can. That's how many children you will have, and the whole earth will be blessed through your family.
After many long years of waiting, Abraham had a son named Isaac. And then Isaac grew up and had sons of his own. And those sons, Jacob and Esau, grew up and had children as well. Jacob, who was called Israel, had 12 sons. So God had given Abraham a huge family, just as he promised, but still, God's people, the Israelites, were lost and broken, separated from God. Time and again, they always tried to do things their own way instead of waiting for God. When God rescued his people from slavery in Egypt, they quickly forgot and tried to make their own God.
All hail the golden calf, moo, moo, moo.
The Israelites grew impatient when God gave them a new law.
Oh, these commandments are hard. We want a king like all the other nations.
But when God gave them a king, they still refused to wait on him.
Oh, the king's laws are no fair. We want a new God like all the other nations.
Nothing brought them rest or peace. The people were still lost and broken and separated from God, and it was this way for thousands of years. But God had not forgotten the promise he'd made Abraham.
The whole earth will be blessed through your family.
God still had a plan to show his people just how much he cared for them. He knew that this broken world could never save itself, so in his perfect time, God made a way. God sent his son Jesus to bring peace on earth once and for all. Jesus grew up and he taught the people about love and compassion, forgiveness and grace. He healed the sick, befriended the outcasts. But the religious leaders were getting upset with Jesus because he was changing the way that they had always done things.
He's turning the world upside down.
So the religious leaders made a plan to get rid of Jesus, but they didn't know that God could use even this. See, Jesus loved the world so deeply, he freely gave his life on a cross to pay for the sins of the world. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. The Bible tells us that God made peace through Christ's blood, through his death on the cross. His blood pays for every sin ever committed and ever to be committed. And since Jesus paid the price for everyone's sins, people no longer have to be separated from God. But in the 3 dark days since Jesus' death, his followers didn't quite understand that yet. They were huddled in the dark, afraid that they too might be arrested or even killed.
Who's there?
Early in the morning on the 3rd day, Mary Magdalene arrived at the home where the disciples were staying.
They have taken the Lord out of the tomb. We don't know where they have put him.
The disciples stared at each other in shock. Then Jesus' closest friends, Peter and John, lunged for the door. They raced each other all the way to the tomb where Jesus had been placed.
The tomb really is empty.
There are the linen cloths they wrapped him in.
Peter and John returned home, still uncertain and confused, but Mary Magdalene, who had followed them, stayed behind in the garden, weeping. She turned to see a man nearby and thought he was the gardener.
Sir, did you carry Jesus away? Tell me where you put him.
Mary. As soon as the man spoke, Mary realized who he was. It was Jesus, alive again.
Teacher!
Overjoyed, Mary returned to the disciples to share the incredible news.
I have seen the Lord.
It was true. Jesus had come back from the dead. He's more powerful than sin, more powerful than death. And through him, we can have peace with God as we wait for him to make everything right in the end, just as he has promised.
When Jesus was crucified, that must have felt like the worst day in history. Jesus' friends were scared and just heartbroken. How could something like that have happened? Jesus was innocent, he was powerful, he was supposed to be the Savior. But on that one day, all hope was dashed. It wasn't until 3 days later that Jesus' disciples began to understand the truth, that God knew all along where he was going and how he was going to get there. God had a plan. Even from the beginning, when Adam and Eve first broke the rules, God was already working on a plan to bring us back to him. God knew that his pure and innocent son, Jesus, would be the sacrifice that would pay for the sins of the world. But God's plan wouldn't end there, because 3 days after Jesus died, he came back. So not only did God save the whole world through the sacrifice of his son, he proved that we could trust him no matter what when he brought Jesus back from the dead. That's some big plan. And it's a big reason to celebrate today. Really, it's a big reason to celebrate every day. The one thing to remember is this, and it's the one thing you should never forget. Jesus is alive. God had a plan all along, and his plan was amazing. Happy Easter, everyone.